Before The Matrix was blowing up box office records, winning Oscars, and launching the Wachowski sisters into superstardom, there was a little film called Bound. The Wachowskis' criminally underseen directorial debut from 1996 is one hell of a suspenseful and sexy thriller. It takes heavy inspiration from classic Hollywood film noirs and tells it through a punk queer 90s lens that's wholly unique. The movie, to put it bluntly, absolutely kicks ass. By no means is this an obscure film, it has a cult following, but it is woefully underseen given just how good it is, and considering how famous the Wachowskis have become. For anyone who enjoys the films of the Wachowski sisters, their very first one out of the gate is a must-see, and is quite possibly as dense with philosophy and subtextual themes as the Matrix films notoriously are. I've always enjoyed this film immensely, and felt it was ripe for a deep dive of analysis. In the sea of film essays on YouTube, I surprisingly couldn't find one about this movie. So I decided to do it myself. Strap in, because this is a dense one. Before I continue, I do want to warn people though that I will be discussing this film in depth and therefore spoiling pretty much every plot element within the film. I know it's 30 years old, but if you haven't seen it yet, I do highly encourage you to watch it first and then come back to this video. It really is just a great film and deserves to be experienced with fresh eyes. For everyone else who has seen the film though, let's dive in. The movie begins with Corky, a rough and tumble butch lesbian fresh out of prison moving into her new apartment. She quickly meets her next door neighbors, the sketchy looking Caesar and the alluring Violet, who was definitely making eyes at her. Shortly after, Violet invites Corky over under the guise of needing plumbing fix, but really as an excuse to make a pass at her. It doesn't take long before the two women begin a steamy and passionate love affair, and Violet dumps some heavy truths on Corky. Violet's boyfriend, Caesar, is a mobster, and a pretty dangerous one at that, routinely conducting his violent business in front of Violet, traumatizing her to her core. She wants to leave Caesar, but is terrified of the repercussions. One recent, particularly disturbing incident that occurred in Violet's apartment involved Caesar and several of his mobster buddies brutally interrogating one of their own through torture. Turns out this poor sap bleeding over the toilet was skimming mob money off the top to the tune of $2 million. Violet hears everything in the other room, and, even more disturbing, later witnesses Caesar return after recovering the stolen $2 million, completely covered in blood. Both of them wash and dry the money before recounting it and stuffing it neatly back into a suitcase to be handed over to the head honcho, the mobster at the top, Gino. You see, Caesar isn't really a boss. He seems somewhat respected amongst his crew, but is still very much operating as a soldier within the mob, following orders of several people that pull rank over him. And that's when the plan is hatched. Corky and Violet come up with a scheme to steal the $2 million right from under Caesar's nose, to frame him as the one who stole the money all along from Gino, and thus, hopefully, allowing both of them to escape without Caesar coming after them. Things don't really go as planned for them. What follows is some real juicy genre filmmaking. Violet takes the money out of the suitcase, swaps it with newspapers, and when Caesar finds out, he launches into a full-blown panic. He knows that if he doesn't deliver the money to Gino, he's dead. The rest of the film unfolds with one terrific set piece after another, following a completely unhinged Caesar, played wonderfully over the top by Joe Pantoliano, paranoid out of his mind and suspecting anyone and everyone of conspiring against him. Lots of tense standoffs and shootouts follow. As is the case with all of the Wachowskis' films, Bound is as exhilarating in its surface-level action as it is in its subtextual, subversive themes. This is a film brimming with transgressive ideas of sexuality, gender identity, and the liberation of oneself from the pressures of societal expectations. In very much the same way that Neo must learn to free himself from the mental prison of the Matrix, so too must Violet and Corky escape from their prison of male violence and subjugation. Bound has become something of a cult classic within the realm of queer cinema, and it's easy to see why. Of course, Bound was far from the first film to explicitly depict lesbian characters, and yet for 1996 especially, Bound's depiction is surprisingly nuanced, maybe even for the time radical. In terms of queer relationships represented on film, by the 1990s, lesbian relationships had been made slightly more kosher in media than, say, a relationship between two men. The reason for that being so was that most depictions of lesbians within media at that time were shown through the perspective of the male gaze, as a form of erotic titillation clearly aimed at male viewers. A film from around the same time period, 1998's Wild Things is a clear example of the stark difference in care and representation presented on screen. Wild Things features sequences of two women kissing and even having sex, but it's clear that the depiction of these women are not meant to portray accurate lesbian relationships on an emotional level, let alone a physical level. Instead, their sexuality is used merely as an excuse to have two attractive women explore their bi-curiosity in a performative way that men, specifically if not exclusively, find sexy and unthreatening. This is further underscored by the fact that the sex scenes in Wild Things include a third male partner, subconsciously indicating that any queer sexuality on display is only in service of and performed in front of a contributing male figure. Bound, in stark comparison, eschews any form of servicing male characters or appealing to the male gaze. The relationship in Bound comes across as true and authentic, and the characterization of our two heroines highlights the vast spectrum in which one's sexuality can be explored. The character of Corky, played by Gina Gershon, is a rough-around-the-edges, masculine-presenting woman who recently just got out of a stint in prison. With her dark leather jacket, tattoos, and gruff handyman demeanor, Corky occupies a template usually reserved in film for the stoic male protagonist. In contrast, Violet, played by Jennifer Tilly, is portrayed as femme, wearing traditionally feminine clothing such as dresses, revealing tops, skirts, etc., topped with a breathy, sensual voice seemingly designed to drive men wild. She is, initially, the opposite of Corky. Violet is shown at first to be weaker, more subservient to her gangster boyfriend, and out of her depths in the realm of committing crime or, say, fixing plumbing in a way that Corky is not. This disparity leads to some mistrust on Corky's part. As already mentioned, early in the film, Violet invites Corky over under the guise of needing some plumbing fixed, but truly, she's just trying to seduce Corky. Corky is all too aware of Violet's flirtation and initially pushes back against her advances. She is worried at first that Violet's attempts at seduction are merely a form of bi-curiosity. Violet is an outwardly femme-presenting character who is also living with her male boyfriend. Corky's reservation is a defense mechanism. Without spelling it out, we can infer that Corky has been used by other women in the past as perhaps an experiment to be later discarded. To be clear, this film in my description is not meant as a form of bi-erasure in the slightest. What I am indicating is that there is a difference in someone who wants to dabble in their sexuality with no actual intention of committing to a queer relationship, and those who are genuinely seeking queer relationships. What Corky is looking for is the latter. She strikes me as a woman in search of partners assured in their sexuality, and to find women who feel for her the way that she feels for them. The assumption that Corky has about Violet, based on her femme presentation, is that she can't possibly be a true lesbian in the way that Corky is. Violet assures Corky, however, that this is truly who she is. The only performative aspect of her personality is the one that appears as the loving and doting arm candy girlfriend to her gangster boyfriend. Corky's assumption is wrong, as well as the audience assumption of what role Violet is to take in this story. Violet isn't a straight woman who is merely dabbling. She is a lesbian woman who genuinely wants to be with Corky, to be her true self, perhaps for the first time in her life. The queer authenticity is further highlighted by a short scene in which Corky visits a lesbian bar. The bar itself was, at the time, a real lesbian bar, with many of the extras in the scene being regular patrons of that bar. The Wachowskis didn't cast the extras of the bar as glamorous movie star types of conventionally attractive, femme-presenting women. Instead, the women shown here look like real people, with clothing and hairstyles authentically rooted in queer culture of the 90s. The authentic cherry on top is the inclusion of a cameo by writer Susie Bright. Bright is an American feminist writer whose notable works involve sexuality and politics, and was one of the leading figures writing about lesbianism in the 90s. Visually, this is a direct message to the audience that this is not a Hollywood depiction of lesbians, but a true look inside the culture and space of lesbian women. In addition to her cameo, Susie Bright also worked as a technical advisor on the film, working with the Wachowskis to ensure that the depiction of lesbian women on screen were authentic, and also working as what would nowadays be referred to as an intimacy coordinator for the film's sex scene, long before that role was commonplace on film sets. Speaking of which, the depiction of queer sexuality culminates in the film's famous sex scene between Corky and Violet. I, of course, cannot show the scene here on YouTube, but I'll do my best to describe it. The scene can be categorized as nothing short of transgressive for the time. Their love scene is not a male fantasy of what two women making love look like. This scene was meant to depict the honest truth. I can think of other examples, not just from that time period, but even more recent movies, in which male directors feel woefully inexperienced in their depiction of lesbian sex. I'm thinking of 2013's Blue is the Warmest Color, where the direction from Abdelatif Kashish seemed to be just telling his two leading ladies to mash their bits together, if you'll pardon the expression. The result is an awkward, overly extended sequence in Blue that seems more intent on showing off as much skin as possible of the actresses, with very little care on how two women actually behave together in bed. While there is nudity shown in the sex scene from Bound, it is certainly not the focal point of the frame, and appears incidentally, as much of the image is cast in dark, moody shadows. The scene plays out in one long, unbroken take, with the camera moving around the actresses' bodies and landing on their faces. The focus is on the passion and pleasure of the women. It may seem quaint now, but in the 1990s, sex scenes showing women having orgasms were pretty rare. The MPAA and prudish censors at the time, for some reason, felt that it was more salacious to see women enjoying themselves during sex than a man. Yet the scene in Bound shows it front and center. These are two women enjoying themselves, and unlike Blue is the Warmest Color, are actually touching each other in authentic ways and not looking like something out of a bad porno. It's interesting to note as well that this scene shows Violet pleasuring Corky. As essayist Mackenzie Wark noted in their foreword for the Criterion Collection edition of this film, it was Violet the femme who Corky the butch, once again upending expectations. Societal norms, especially at the time, would suggest that the more masculine presenting of the two, Corky, would take charge in this scene. This upending of expectations is a common theme throughout the film and leads me to my next area of exploration, that of liberation and deconstruction of societal norms. It's time we turn our attention to the artists behind the film, the Wachowski sisters. The filmmakers, Lana and Lily Wachowski, are two trans women who only openly transitioned within the public eye years after this film had premiered. To be clear, the Wachowskis are famously very private people, and the actual timeline of their transitions is not widely available to the public. From what I can gather, however, is that at least publicly in 1996, neither presented as trans women. In fact, I can remember quite clearly when the news did break sometime in the 2010s that the Wachowskis had transitioned. First Lana, and followed a few years later with Lily. There was an element of shock and surprise in the media and comment boards across the internet. People would ask, how could the creators of such a kick-ass action movie like The Matrix be made by two trans women? Hindsight, as they say, is 2020, and that expression feels especially evident to me in terms of this film and who made it. While a lot has been discussed about the trans allegory and themes present in the Matrix films, I believe that themes of both queerness and transness had been present all the way back in their very first film as well. There is a brief moment in the movie that sticks out to me, of the gangster Caesar walking in on Corky and Violet getting cozy together on the couch. Initially, Caesar loses his temper and begins yelling, furious, until he gets a closer look at Corky and realizes, oh, she's a woman. From a distance, Caesar mistook her for a man, due to her haircut and clothing, etc. Right from the very beginning, the main character in the Wachowskis' very first film is gender non-conforming. The idea that a woman, or anyone, should look, dress, and act in a certain way was already explicitly being challenged by the Wachowskis. The opening scene in particular shows Corky tied up, bound, and literally trapped in a closet. This scene is a flash forward teasing the events that will occur later, but it strikes me as particularly potent an image for the director's debut film. I admit that I may just be reading into symbolism that was not consciously put there, and that the opening scene could simply be an enticing hook. Yet, the Wachowskis have proven themselves to be extremely intelligent filmmakers, who understand the deep resonance symbolic imagery has within their films. By 1996, the term trapped or hiding in the closet was very common nomenclature to describe queer individuals who have not yet publicly outed their true sexuality or gender. I don't think it's really that much of a stretch to infer that through this closet imagery, the Wachowskis were relaying a particular fear of their own, a fear of embracing their true identity within a world hostile towards anything related to homosexuality. This is a film, of course, about liberation. Let's look again at the character of Violet. Initially, she is presented as a secondary character, but at some point in the halfway mark, she transitions effectively into being the main character. Corky is set up initially to be our main protagonist, but as things really hit the fan, we, the audience, view the vast majority of the rest of the action and story developing in front of Violet's eyes. As I mentioned earlier, when we first meet Violet, she appears to be a sex pot straight out of a male fantasy. When Violet attempts to seduce Corky, Corky is initially reluctant, unsure of how someone who looks and sounds as Violet does could be attracted to her. That mistrust is not immediately assuaged, however, as the movie playfully toys with the genre conventions of film noir. If you've seen The Matrix, you know how much the Wachowskis love film noir, and how influential the noir look of high contrast lighting and dark shadows is to their work. Violet herself is set up initially to be the archetypal femme fatale. In film noir, the femme fatale is usually the seductress who, through her feminine wiles, lures the male protagonist into a web of crime and sex, only to ultimately betray the man. The movie sets up its characters in a way that equate Corky to be the Fred McMurray of the story and Violet as the Barbara Stanwyck. That potential duplicity hovers over the first half of Bound. When Violet first brings up the idea of stealing the $2 million from Caesar, Corky again is dubious on whether Violet's intentions are pure. What if Corky helps Violet, only for her to be double-crossed and for Violet to leave her while absconding with the money? Further doubt is cast on Violet after Corky hears her having loud sex with another man that isn't Caesar. This is after both Corky and Violet have already made love, and is seen by Corky as a lover's betrayal. She then confronts Violet about sleeping with the other man in a fit of jealousy, to which Violet responds that that wasn't sex, that was work. Violet is a sex worker. It's unclear in the story whether she was working as one prior to meeting Caesar, or if Caesar was the one who coerced her into it. Either way, it adds another interesting wrinkle into the identity of Violet as a character. She is a woman living multiple lives, pretending to be a doting girlfriend, pretending to be heterosexual, pretending to be weak. Okay, maybe the last one isn't pretending. Not at first. Perhaps Violet did feel weak and powerless before meeting Corky, only for her true strength within to shine through after connecting with Corky. Any suspicions that Corky, or the audience, had about Violet's intentions is erased as the film reaches its boiling point climax. In a subversion of the femme fatale trope, Violet does not betray Corky. She is honest all the way through and goes out of her way to protect Corky, even when it puts her own life in danger. Though Corky was set up initially as the macho hero of the story, it's in fact Violet who saves both of their skins. The damsel in distress is really the true hero. How the world views a person based on how they look, sound, or dress is flawed. It didn't matter what gender Violet was, or whether she presented more feminine rather than masculine, she was the hero of the story the entire time. I believe that this is a plea from the Wachowskis to look at one's inner strength to see their true identity. I also believe that Corky and Violet are really the divided identity that the Wachowskis feel within themselves, that the two characters are actually two sides of the same coin, and reflect the duality of personas present within the Wachowskis. I mentioned in the very beginning that there would be some philosophy in this, so stick with me. I believe that the film, through its characters, embraces the philosophical exploration of identity, which is commonly referred to as the metaphysics of identity. This is not to be confused with the sociological notion of identity, as in referring to what kind of clothes you wear or what religion you have. Instead, the metaphysics of identity explores many concepts, yet the one I think in particular that applies here is the identity of indiscernibles. And yes, before you ask, I am pulling definitions from online because while I like to consider myself fascinated with the study of philosophy, I am also by no means an authoritative teacher of it. Anyway, the identity of indiscernibles states that if two entities have the same properties, then they must be identical. On this principle, for any two different items, there must be some distinguishable differences, otherwise, they are one and the same. If there is literally no difference between two objects, then there isn't two objects. There is only one. With that in mind, let's look at the final lines of Bound, where Corky looks to Violet and says,
"You know what the difference is between you and me, Violet?
No.
Me neither.
This line works on multiple levels. First, it is further indication that whatever perception Corky had of Violet in the beginning was wrong, and that the two women had far more in common with each other than they did not, that they are soulmates. Yet to me, this line also fits in with the principles of the identity of indiscernibles. Corky can literally not tell the difference between her and Violet. If there is no discernible difference between the two of them, then there isn't two of them. There's only one. I view both of these characters to be reflective of the interior of the Wachowskis' identity. The part of them that relates to the masculine presenting persona of Corky also relate to the feminine presenting persona of Violet. That both of these characters, equally, are personifications of the Wachowskis, and that for whatever discernible differences are perceived initially, by the end are washed away. And that's Bound for you. I know that there is a ton more to go into with this film. I didn't even really get to talk about the cinematic form here, in which the Wachowskis absolutely flexed their filmmaking muscles and proved just why they were ready to make The Matrix next. But this video is already a bit too rambly and long. I mean, hey, it's my first video essay. Hopefully I'll get better at consolidating my thoughts as I continue. If you liked this video though, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to my channel, as I hope to make many more videos about wonderful films that don't get enough love. Thank you, and hope to see you in the next one.